marks the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, and experts say stay-at-home orders had a positive effect on the environment because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So to talk all about this, let's bring in E&E reporter Thomas Frank. Thomas, in some of your pieces, you write about how the president's major disaster declaration that goes across all 50 states has had some unintended consequences, if you will, when it comes to climate projects around the nation. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. It's two completely unrelated events. So in 2018, Congress and the president signed a law that basically sets aside a percentage of all the money that the federal government, meaning FEMA, allocates for disasters. It sets it aside in a new account for disaster mitigation projects. So for things like moving houses out of flood zones, making properties more resilient to hurricanes, those sort of things. And the amount of money varies each year depending on how much gets spent in disaster relief. So fast forward now to this past, just a month ago, when President Trump started declaring every single state a federal disaster because of COVID. Well, what that means is that there's going to be hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe billions of dollars, that will now be set aside for these mitigation projects to make the country safer from disasters, from flooding, from hurricanes and the like. So it's this odd sort of coincidence of two unrelated events, a year and a half apart, that could result in this windfall.
So I guess the question becomes, with regards to this windfall, what are some of the positives and perhaps some of the negatives of states having this influx of cash?
Well, the positives are that states will be able to do things that are expensive. For example, if there's, say, a community that's next to the coast or next to a river, and it keeps getting flooded year after year after year, now a state or a county will have the cash to buy those properties and move the residents somewhere to higher ground. So it's generally, there's nothing bad about it. The bad news is that, well, the reason that this money is available is because we're going through this pandemic that is generating all these costs. It's another cost to federal taxpayers. But when you spend money on things like hazard mitigation, it tends to pay for itself because it's a lot cheaper to move a house out of a flood zone than to pay for it to be repaired every 3 or 5 years. So it's really good news. It's unfortunate that the reason that there's going to be this windfall is because we're in the situation that we're in right now.
So the federal government giveth, but can the federal government taketh away or perhaps reallocate some of that funding?
Well, I mean, the federal government can do anything that it wants, but no, this is written in a law. It's called the Disaster Reform and Recovery Act of 2018. It was enacted overwhelmingly by Congress in October 2018 and signed by the president. There's an enormous amount of support for it throughout Congress, throughout the executive branch. So you never say that the federal government can't do something, because the federal government always finds a way to do things. But this is a popular program that a lot of people have been pushing for a long time. So I don't think that it's something that the federal government is going to say, wow, there's this pot of money and we could use it for something else. I think that it's as etched in stone as anything can be.
So, Doc, Thomas, before we let you go, I want to ask about the environmental impact due to the coronavirus pandemic. And it certainly, of course, we care about the human lives and the human toll that this pandemic has taken on populations all over the world. But I do want to get a sense from you of the perhaps how the changes in the environment are being felt because of the coronavirus pandemic.
Well, the important thing to emphasize is that any sort of changes are temporary, and nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. So I think it's early, it's premature for people to be saying that we've entered a new era and that yes, emissions are down, and we've all seen the photos of, suddenly in India they can see the mountains where they couldn't see them before. But it's really hard to know what's going to happen in the long term. And everyone wants to get back to normal right now, and normal means going back to, sweetie, 1 second. Normal means going back to, to a lifestyle that is very intensive in using fossil fuels. If this will result in some permanent changes in the amount that people drive or fly, then we can celebrate that. But we're not going to know that for several years.
Really interesting. Thomas Frank, thank you very much. Fascinating.
Thanks for having me.